I've never really been good at being around people. Even as a kid, I preferred empty places over crowded rooms. While everyone else spent weekends hanging out at malls or going to parties, I spent mine wandering through forests or biking down forgotten roads just to see where they ended. By the time I turned 17, that curiosity evolved into something a little darker. I became obsessed with abandoned places. Not for internet clout or social media photos. I never uploaded videos or bragged about it online. I liked the silence. The feeling of stepping into places the world had forgotten. Empty schools, collapsed barns, closed-down factories. Every building felt frozen in time, like walking into somebody else's memory. And eventually, normal abandoned places stopped being enough. I wanted locations nobody talked about. So, I started spending nights on satellite maps, scanning through rural areas looking for structures hidden deep inside woods or far from roads. I got surprisingly good at spotting abandoned properties. Broken roofs, overgrown driveways, strange clearings in forests. I kept a notebook filled with coordinates and planned routes like some kind of obsessive scavenger hunter. Most weekends, I'd pick 3 or 4 locations and spend the whole day exploring. That October, I found a place that immediately stood out. A tiny chapel buried in the forests outside a town called Black Hollow, Pennsylvania. It wasn't near any houses. No roads led directly to it either. Just a narrow dirt path disappearing into miles of woods. Satellite images showed the roof partially collapsed and trees growing almost against the walls. It looked untouched for decades. That alone was enough for me. I drove out there on a cold Saturday afternoon in my old blue Honda. The farther I got from town, the worse the roads became, until pavement turned to cracked gravel and finally dirt. Eventually, I reached a narrow shoulder near the woods and parked beside a rusted hunting sign. The forest around me was dead quiet. Not peaceful quiet either. Heavy quiet. I grabbed my flashlight and backpack and started walking. The deeper I went, the stranger the woods felt. Usually, forests are full of sound, birds, insects, wind moving through branches. But out there, everything felt muted, like the entire place was holding its breath. About 15 minutes into the hike, I started noticing junk scattered through the trees. Old buckets, rotting planks, pieces of rusted fencing. Then, I saw the clearing. The chapel stood in the middle of it like something abandoned by time itself. It was small, with faded white paint peeling off the wood siding in long strips. The steeple leaned slightly to one side, and several stained glass windows were shattered. Dead vines climbed across the walls and wrapped around the porch railing. But the thing that caught my attention first wasn't the church. It was the well. It sat directly in front of the chapel, about 20 feet from the entrance. Circular stone walls surrounded it, black with moss and age. I walked toward it slowly, surprised to see it wasn't covered or sealed off. Most abandoned wells are blocked off for safety. This one was completely open. I leaned over carefully and aimed my flashlight downward. The beam barely reached anything, just darkness, deep enough that the light seemed to disappear before touching bottom. Then I heard it. Click. I froze. 2 seconds later came another. Click. The sound echoed softly from somewhere below. At first, I thought it might be dripping water, but it wasn't random enough. The rhythm was too precise, like someone tapping a rock against stone at perfectly timed intervals. Click. 2 seconds. Click. I stared into the darkness longer than I should have. Something about the sound made it hard to look away, almost hypnotic. Then, a gust of cold wind snapped me out of it, and I backed away from the well quickly, suddenly uncomfortable without fully understanding why. I turned toward the chapel. The front doors were slightly open. One of them moved faintly in the breeze with a low, creaking groan. I climbed the porch steps carefully. Several boards bent beneath my boots, sounding dangerously weak. Up close, the building smelled like wet wood and mildew. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. Dust floated through pale sunlight pouring from broken stained glass windows. Rows of wooden pews stretched across the room, some overturned and others collapsed entirely. At the far end stood a crooked altar beneath a huge cracked cross hanging on the wall. Despite the decay, there was something strangely beautiful about it, like the building had died slowly instead of suddenly. I walked carefully through the chapel, taking pictures with my camera. The silence inside felt even worse than outside. Every movement echoed. Near the altar, I found an arched doorway leading deeper into the building. Behind it was a narrow hallway lined with tiny rooms that looked like storage areas or offices. Most doors were broken off hinges entirely. At the end of the hallway sat a staircase leading downward. The basement door hung halfway open. And for the first time in years of exploring abandoned places, I hesitated. I don't really know why. Nothing had happened yet. Still, something about that stairway bothered me immediately. Maybe it was the darkness below. Maybe it was the smell drifting upward, damp earth mixed with rot. Or maybe it was instinct finally trying to warn me for once. But I ignored it, because that's what I always did back then. I started down the stairs slowly. Each step groaned loudly beneath my weight. Dust drifted through my flashlight beam while shadows twisted across the walls. 1, 2, 3. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. 4, 5, 6. Then the 7th step shattered beneath me. The wood exploded with a loud crack, and suddenly my entire leg punched through the staircase. Before I could catch myself, the rest of my body dropped forward, and I slammed hard onto the basement floor below. Pain shot through my side as my flashlight flew from my hand. Jesus Christ, I muttered breathlessly. For a second, I just lay there stunned. Then I heard a voice, soft, high-pitched, coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. At first, I couldn't understand the words. It sounded like somebody mumbling nonsense under their breath. Then, clearly, I heard one word. Hello? Every muscle in my body locked up. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it around the basement. Broken furniture, dirt floor, stone walls. Nothing else. Then, my light landed on a narrow opening carved into the far wall. A tunnel. It looked hand-dug. Uneven dirt walls stretched into darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. And from somewhere deep inside it, the voice whispered again. The voice came again. Hello? It sounded wrong. Not ghostly, not demonic. Honestly, that would have been easier to process. It sounded human, but distorted somehow, like someone trying to imitate speech without fully understanding how conversations worked. I stood frozen near the broken staircase, gripping my flashlight so tightly my hand hurt. The tunnel stretched ahead of me through packed dirt and stone, barely tall enough for someone to walk through without ducking slightly. The walls looked clawed apart rather than properly excavated. Jagged shovel marks covered the sides, and roots poked through the ceiling in thick, tangled strands. The smell coming from inside was awful. Wet dirt mixed with something sour and rotten. I should have left right then. Every normal instinct in my body was screaming at me to climb those stairs and get the hell out of there. Instead, I took another step toward the tunnel. That's the thing about curiosity. Sometimes it overrides fear completely. The voice muttered again in that same strange tone, gibberish wrapped around occasional recognizable words. Hello? Down? Still here. I moved slowly toward the opening, trying to convince myself it was probably another explorer messing with me. Maybe some homeless person living underground. Maybe teenagers hiding out. Anything logical. But the deeper I aimed my flashlight into the tunnel, the less human it felt. The walls narrowed after about 10 feet. Dirt and stone pressed inward tightly enough that I had to turn sideways to continue moving. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I moved farther in. Then the clicking sound returned. Click. The exact same noise from the well. 2 seconds later, click. This time it sounded much louder underground, like it was close. I stopped moving immediately. The tunnel had gone completely silent except for those clicks. Then the voice whispered again, much closer now. Found you. I felt every hair on my arms stand up. The flashlight flickered violently in my hand. I smacked it instinctively against my palm and the light steadied again. But the sudden noise echoed through the tunnel much louder than I expected. Then everything changed. The clicking stopped. The voice stopped. Absolute silence filled the tunnel. And from somewhere ahead of me, I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly. Dragging. Like something pulling itself slowly through dirt. That finally broke me. I turned around immediately and started back toward the basement as fast as I could without slipping. My breathing became shallow and panicked while the tunnel suddenly felt much smaller than before. Behind me, the clicking started again, faster now. Click, click, click. No longer spaced apart evenly, and mixed between them came that same broken voice, trying desperately to form words. Stay, don't, leave. I practically stumbled out of the tunnel entrance and sprinted across the basement toward the stairs. My flashlight beam bounced wildly across the walls while adrenaline completely took over. Something moved behind me. I didn't see it clearly, just fast, pale motion near the tunnel opening. I grabbed the staircase railing and climbed upward, skipping the broken step entirely. Several boards groaned dangerously beneath my weight. Halfway up, I heard something hit the basement floor behind me. Hard, like bare feet slamming into dirt. I nearly lost my balance. I didn't look back, not once. The moment I reached the hallway upstairs, I ran. Through the storage rooms, past the chapel pews, straight out the front doors. Cold air hit me like water as I burst outside into the clearing again. I didn't stop running until I reached the well. And that's when I realized something even worse. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. Just silence. Then, click. I slowly turned toward the well. The sound had come from inside it again. I stepped closer despite every instinct telling me not to. The darkness inside looked somehow deeper now, thicker. I leaned slightly over the edge and heard breathing. Very faint, coming from below. Then came the voice again, perfectly clear this time. Come back. I staggered backwards so fast I nearly fell. The voice wasn't echoing anymore. It sounded directly beneath me, close, like whoever spoke was standing only a few feet under the opening. My flashlight suddenly died. Not flickered, died completely. At that exact moment, something shifted below the well. A scraping sound. Then another. Like fingers dragging against stone. I ran. I don't even remember most of the sprint back through the woods. Branches whipped against my face while dead leaves cracked beneath my boots. I wasn't thinking anymore. Pure survival instinct had taken over completely. Several times I thought I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps. Crawling. Fast crawling. At one point, I swear I heard that clicking sound again somewhere off to my right among the trees, keeping pace with me. Click. 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 I burst out of the woods gasping for breath and practically threw myself into my car. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice trying to start the engine. The second the car finally turned over, I locked the doors automatically. Then I looked toward the woods. For a second, I saw movement between the trees, a pale shape standing just inside the forest line. Too tall, too thin, and completely still. I sped out of there so fast my tires kicked dirt across the road behind me. The entire drive home felt unreal. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights following me. Or worse. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started drifting off, I'd hear that clicking sound again in my head. Click. 2 seconds. Click. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed beside my bed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message contained only 3 words. Come back down. No punctuation, no explanation. My stomach dropped instantly. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before replying, "Who is this?" The typing bubble appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, another message came through. You left me. I blocked the number instantly, but 5 minutes later, another text arrived from a completely different number. Click. That was it. Just the word, click. I shut my phone off completely after that. The next morning, I convinced myself somebody had followed me from the church, maybe squatters trying to scare trespassers away, maybe locals messing with people. That explanation lasted about 3 days, until I checked my camera. Most of the photos were normal, the chapel exterior, the pews, the hallway. Then I reached the basement pictures. My blood went cold, because standing inside the tunnel entrance in one of the images was a person. At least I think it was. The figure was impossibly thin, with pale skin stretched tightly over its body. Its arms looked too long, hanging nearly to the ground. And its face, there wasn't one. Just smooth, pale skin where facial features should be. The thing was blurry, almost hidden in darkness, but one detail stood out clearly. Its mouth, a vertical slit splitting slowly open down the center of its face. I deleted the photo immediately. A week later, I tried finding the chapel again online. The satellite images were gone. The dirt road no longer appeared on maps. Even stranger, I couldn't find any record that a church had ever existed in Black Hollow at all. Nothing. No history, no photos, no documents. Like the place had never been there. I stopped exploring abandoned places after that, completely. That was 4 years ago. But sometimes, late at night, usually when everything around me gets very quiet, I still hear it. Faint, distant. Click. 2 seconds later, click. And every single time I get the overwhelming feeling that something underneath that chapel is still waiting for me to come back. Back when I was 16, my friends and I had this habit of going places we definitely weren't supposed to be. Not because we were criminals or anything, we were just bored kids growing up in a dead town where absolutely nothing ever happened. The kind of place where the biggest excitement of the month was somebody crashing their truck into a mailbox after drinking too much at the local bar. So, we made our own excitement. Most weekends were spent hiking through woods, exploring abandoned places, or sneaking onto old properties looking for something interesting. Looking back now, we were lucky we didn't end up arrested or worse way sooner than we did. The worst experience happened during late summer of 2021. There were 3 of us that day. Me, my friend Caleb, and another friend named Mason. It started with fishing. There's a huge stretch of woods outside a town called Briar Ridge in southern Missouri. Deep in those woods sits a massive piece of farmland surrounded by fencing and narrow dirt roads. A creek cuts through the property, and apparently the fishing there was supposed to be incredible. We figured nobody would notice 3 teenagers sneaking in for an hour or 2. We were wrong. About 20 minutes after setting up near the creek, we heard barking somewhere through the trees, then yelling. An older guy came storming through the woods with a huge German shepherd beside him. The dog was going insane, snarling and lunging at the leash while the man screamed at us to get off his property. We grabbed our stuff immediately and apologized, but he kept shouting even after we started leaving. The weirdest part was his phone. He kept holding it to his ear during the entire confrontation like he was talking to somebody, but he never once spoke into it directly. It almost sounded like someone else was listening while he yelled at us. At one point, he shouted, "I found them near the creek." That stuck with me. Not the police, not his wife. Them. Like we'd interrupted something. Still, once we got back to the road, the whole thing became funny to us again. We laughed about the angry farmer and the attack dog the entire drive home. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Caleb decided we needed to go back. Not to fish, to explore. According to him, nobody keeps property that heavily guarded unless they're hiding something interesting. And honestly, part of me agreed. The next evening, right before sunset, the three of us parked near an abandoned grain silo about half a mile from the property and headed into the woods on foot. The deeper we went, the more isolated everything felt. The forest was dense enough to block most of the fading sunlight, and eventually we reached an old fence line partially hidden behind overgrown bushes. Beyond it sat open farmland stretching farther than I expected. At first glance, it looked normal. Rolling fields, horse fencing, a few distant structures. But after climbing over the fence and moving deeper onto the property, little details started feeling wrong. There were horses everywhere, dozens of them, but no other animals. No cows, no chickens, nothing else. Just horses spread across different fenced areas staring silently towards us while we walked. Mason joked that maybe the owner was secretly breeding racehorses or something. Nobody laughed much. The farther we went, the stranger the place became. About 15 minutes in, we found the first group of vehicles. They were parked beside an old collapsing barn hidden near the woods. Luxury cars, a lot of them. Porsches, Range Rovers, Corvettes, even a Bentley covered by a stained tarp. Most looked damaged or partially stripped apart. Some had missing doors or smashed windows. Others sat on cinder blocks with tires removed entirely. Caleb immediately whispered, "Dude, this is definitely illegal." No kidding. The whole area looked like some kind of hidden shop buried in the middle of nowhere. We moved carefully between the vehicles, trying not to make noise. The deeper we explored, the more cars we found hidden behind sheds and under makeshift coverings. At one point, Mason crouched by a black SUV missing its VIN plates and quietly said, "We seriously need to leave." But Caleb was fully invested now. That's how he always was. The more dangerous something became, the more curious he got. Near the barn sat an old camper trailer with shattered windows and rust running down the sides. Caleb insisted on checking inside while Mason kept watch near the woods. I stayed outside holding the trailer door open while Caleb climbed in. The second he stepped inside, his expression changed. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I carefully lifted my head beside him. About 50 yards away sat a wooden table near one of the horse fences. A man sat there completely motionless, and beside him sat a black cat staring directly towards us. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, the man slowly turned his head, and my blood instantly went cold, because his face was completely white. The man's face looked completely blank. At first, I thought maybe the fading sunlight was playing tricks on my eyes, but the longer I stared, the worse it became. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth white skin stretched across the front of his head like wet paper. I froze completely behind the tire pile. The black cat beside him kept staring directly at us without moving an inch. Its eyes reflected faint yellow in the dark, while the man remained perfectly still at the table. Then, the woman stepped into view. She came from behind one of the horse fences carrying something long in her hand that looked like a shovel or maybe a rifle. Even from a distance, I could tell she'd seen us immediately. Unlike the man, her face was normal, but her expression wasn't. She looked annoyed, like we'd interrupted something important. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the woman started walking toward us. Not running, walking fast and deliberate. And that somehow felt even worse. "Go," Mason whispered. Nobody argued. We turned and bolted into the woods immediately. Branches cracked beneath our feet, while dead leaves exploded behind us. I could hear Caleb breathing hard beside me as we sprinted through the trees without any real direction. Behind us came shouting, not angry yelling, instructions, more than one voice. "Circle left! Don't lose them!" The woman's voice cut through the woods louder than the others. "Get the dogs!" That nearly stopped my heart. We ran even harder. The forest around the farm was thick enough that visibility dropped fast once darkness settled in. Branches clawed at my hoodie, while roots nearly tripped me every few seconds. Then came the barking. Deep, close, and getting closer fast. "Oh my God," Mason gasped behind me. We veered downhill through a patch of dense brush, trying desperately to create distance between ourselves and the property. But the woods suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. We started hearing movement everywhere. Heavy footsteps crashing through vegetation, branches snapping. At one point, I heard what sounded like galloping somewhere off to our right. Horses. The sound moved alongside us for several seconds before disappearing again. None of it felt real anymore. The forest had turned into chaos. We eventually slowed near a cluster of fallen trees, completely exhausted and struggling to breathe. The barking sounded farther away now, though still somewhere in the distance. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Caleb said quietly, "Did you see his face?" Mason immediately snapped back, "Don't start that right now." "But you saw it too." Nobody answered, because we had. Every single one of us saw it. I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe the guy was wearing some kind of white mask or bandages, maybe medical gauze wrapped around his face. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There had been no contours, no openings, nothing, just blank white skin. Then we heard something else, whistling, soft and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods ahead of us. All three of us froze instantly. Another whistle answered from behind us, then another farther off to the left. They were coordinating, hunting us. "Move," I whispered urgently. We started walking again, quieter this time, trying not to make noise. Every sound around us suddenly felt amplified. Leaves crunching under boots sounded like explosions. The whistles kept coming intermittently through the darkness, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, always surrounding us. After maybe 15 minutes, we finally spotted a small clearing ahead where moonlight broke through the trees, and sitting in the middle of it was an old pickup truck, rust-covered, abandoned. For one stupid second, I actually felt relieved. Then Mason grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Look." I followed his gaze. Written across the truck's dirty windshield in fresh mud were 4 words: "We know you're here." Every ounce of adrenaline came flooding back instantly. "That wasn't there before," Caleb whispered shakily. No kidding. The mud looked wet, fresh, meaning somebody had written it recently, very recently. Then came the sound of snapping branches directly behind us. Close, too close. We ran again. At that point, panic fully took over. We weren't thinking about directions anymore. We just needed to get out of those woods. The barking returned louder than ever. I risked one glance backward while running and immediately regretted it. Flashlights. At least 3 of them weaving through the trees behind us, and one of the beams moved unnaturally low to the ground, almost crawling. The whistles stopped. Now, all we heard were footsteps and dogs. Suddenly, Caleb screamed. I turned just in time to see him slam into a hidden ditch covered with leaves. He disappeared chest deep into darkness with a horrible crash. Mason and I rushed back immediately. "You okay?" "My ankle," Caleb gasped painfully. He tried pulling himself out, but nearly collapsed again. The barking sounded terrifyingly close now. We grabbed him under both arms and half-carried him through the woods while he limped beside us. Progress became painfully slow. Then we saw headlights ahead. A road. I've never felt relief hit me so hard in my life. We stumbled out of the woods onto a narrow gravel road just as an old pickup truck approached around the bend. The driver slammed his brakes, seeing us practically falling into the road. It was an older man wearing overalls and a hunting cap. "What the hell happened to you boys?" he asked. "Please," Mason gasped. "People are chasing us." The man looked past us towards the woods immediately. His expression changed fast. Without another question, he unlocked the truck doors. "Get in." We climbed inside seconds before barking erupted from the tree line behind us. The old man didn't wait around. He floored the gas instantly. As we sped down the road, I looked back through the rear window. Several figures stood at the forest edge watching us leave. One of them looked unusually tall and pale beneath the moonlight, and beside him sat the black cat, still staring directly at us. The old man drove us nearly 10 miles before finally speaking again. "You boys went near the Holloway farm, didn't you?" None of us answered. We didn't need to. He sighed heavily. "You're lucky." That was all he said. He dropped us off near our cars without another word and drove away. None of us reported what happened. What exactly were we supposed to tell police? That we trespassed onto somebody's property and saw a faceless man in the woods? Nobody would believe us. A week later, Caleb searched online for information about the Holloway farm. He found almost nothing. No business records, no active ownership details, just scattered rumors in old local forums about missing livestock, strange lights in the woods, and people hearing whistles late at night near the property line. One comment stood out, though. A local wrote, "Don't go near that farm after dark. They don't like being watched." Caleb deleted the bookmark immediately. None of us ever went back there again. But every now and then, usually late at night when everything's quiet, I think about that man sitting motionless at the table, that blank white face pointed directly at us. And the worst part is this: even without eyes, I still somehow knew he was looking straight at me.